Welcome to Women Kicking Glass, the only radio show on OC Talk Radio dedicated to empowering women to be the best leaders they can be in any endeavor they choose. Patty Grimm is our host and interviews top women in a variety of fields to help women grow, learn, and lean in together. Patty has over 25 years of experience in primarily male-dominated fields in senior-level management positions. Patty is the owner of Advantage Training Limited, an organizational leadership team training company. She recently released her new book for women called Quiet Women Never Changed History. Be strong, stand out, and stand up. With the subtitle, Let's Go Kick Some Glass.
And that's exactly what we're going to do. We got a couple of real glass kickers this morning here. Welcome, Patty, and her guest.
Hi, Paul. Thanks. And I'm really excited about this show today. The timing probably couldn't be better.
I think you really timed this one right over there.
I have the incredible Katerina Perreault with me today. And it's interesting, as we were chatting before the show, we both realized we're both Czech. So we're both from Czechoslovakia. Her a little bit more recently than my family, but that's okay. She is the owner of Katerina Perreault Law, located in Tarzana, California. So she drove a long time to get here this morning. And actually drove past the studio and had to come back over. And she also counsels at Hart Legal in Beverly Hills. She aggressively uses legislation in all of her courts and all of her proceedings around family court, civil court, probate. She started practicing in California in 2005, and her practice includes trust, probate litigation, financial, physical elder abuse, fiduciary law, conservatorship, family law, etc., as well as being overlapping in all these areas. And she's got some wonderful compliments from a Superior Court judge that's really stated that she handled an unusual case who aggressively used legislation process both in family court and proceedings related to a particular issue. And the topic today is talking about the domestic abuse or violence against women, or however you want to talk about it. So I think it's a really, really important topic. And so I'm just curious, Katerina, how did you get into this? How did you get into law, and how did you get into looking at it from a family abuse or a domestic violence side?
Thank you, Patty, for the intro, and thank you for having this topic. I feel very strongly about this topic, and well, I first started out as a pre-med student, and at 19 I had my son whose father died before he was born. So I had the opportunity to be involved in a trust and probate litigation from that young age. I had to fight for my son's rights because his father didn't have an opportunity to include him in his estate due to the untimely death. And then more recently, unfortunately, I have been involved in a personal divorce where I have been both the victim of abuse and also falsely accused of perpetrating the abuse, which caused me a lot of problems.
Yeah. Wow, that's interesting. So you've actually had, beyond just the Me Too campaign of the sexual harassment, you actually experienced the abuse yourself.
Yes, unfortunately I have, and that is why I want to speak on this topic, because what happens is women who have been abused don't voice their concerns. That's
Right.
what happened to me. And it's important that ladies do feel empowered and feel that they should not be ashamed and should have an opportunity, a platform to express themselves.
Yeah. So what kind of abuse are we talking about? Abuse against women, domestic abuse? Is it physical abuse, emotional abuse? What kind of abuse are we talking about?
Well, Patty, we have various abuses, but I believe that there are four primary areas. We've got the physical abuse,
Okay.
which is usually rough treatment, violence. It doesn't necessarily have to leave an injury, but it still qualifies as physical abuse. Then we've got the emotional and psychological abuse, which includes, and this is relevant in today's age, name-calling, intimidation, threats, yelling, even ignoring, or socially isolating the person. That is all emotional abuse. And then we've got the financial abuse, which can involve wrongfully taking the person's assets or wrongfully taking and usually it's the wife's assets by not providing her with enough information, controlling the assets. And then finally, relevant to the Weinstein era, we've got the sexual abuse.
Right.
And that could include obviously sexual assault or even sexual comments and jokes.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of times it's the inappropriate jokes or comments that sort of create this uncomfortable work environment. And I don't think a day's gone by in the last couple of months where there hasn't been another story of someone in the government, in IT, in Hollywood, and it's affecting all industries, that there isn't some example of some kind of abuse.
Unfortunately, it's very prevalent, and I think that we are just now seeing the extent this abuse has on our society, especially women. And we're
Right.
here to talk about women.
Right.
And for some reason, history talks about how women have accepted this type of abuse, and this would be in domestic relationships or even work relationships,
Right.
sexual, financial. Women tend to accept this type of abuse and not voice it. Perhaps because they don't recognize that it is in fact abuse. So I hope that
Yeah.
ladies who are listening will realize that abuse can take many forms, and you need to speak up.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I can speak personally about a situation where I had actually read an article about why Silicon Valley was so awful to women. I've experienced sexual abuse. I've experienced sexual harassment, all those kinds of things. But I kind of took it as, well, that's just the way they are. It's kind of the work environment. I reported it once, and then it never went anywhere with HR. They were like, well, we can't do anything. He's too powerful. He was an executive vice president for a big company. But the other times I was sort of like, well, I guess this is just kind of the way the work is. And now what's coming out in all these cases is that it's not okay. It's been there for a long time, but it's not okay to treat people inappropriately or do those kinds of things. So
It's not. It's not the norm. It never was. We should never accept it as the norm.
Yep.
Sexual innuendos, sexual jokes, sexual inappropriate touching, at-home abuse, ignoring, name-calling, none of that is acceptable.
Yeah.
And obviously violence is not acceptable at
yeah.
all.
So what's the difference between covert and overt abuses?
Well, so we've got basically two areas here. Like you said, Patty, overt and covert. So overt is something that we can see. It's expressed. So usually with violence, that would be overt. Covert is more hard to recognize because it can usually happen behind, well, all the abuse usually happens behind closed doors.
Right.
But covert abuse is includes a lot of mental aspect to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's inside the mind, and it's in the chemistry between the abuser and the victim. And often I find that there is a certain amount of chemistry between the abuser and the victim, where the abuser has mental control over the victim, and the victim doesn't even realize it.
Right, right. And so many times we were talking about this before the show, and we were talking on the phone a couple weeks ago, is that so much of it, people think that whether the abuse is about sex, but a lot of times it's about control. It's about
That's
this
right.
person feels powerful because they can control you, and they can control you with the physical violence, the covert, right?
Correct, yes.
And which a lot of times they will hit someone in some place where they can't be seen,
Or threaten to.
or threaten them,
Right.
or the overt kind where they're simply saying you're stupid, you're dumb, nobody loves you, and all of that's done behind closed doors.
And not only that, but in domestic relationship, and especially if there's a divorce involved, the covert abuse can be the threats of taking children away.
Right.
The threats of taking financial control away. Well, the ladies probably never had financial control to begin with, although they believed they did. So these are the aspects that the abuser uses, and the abuser knows how to use these aspects against
Right.
the victim. So
Right. So how does the law or the court system treat each one of these cases, these kinds of abuse?
So California has a very comprehensive statutory framework for domestic violence. And California offers domestic violence orders which can protect the victim. You can get a protective order through the penal code, which is in the criminal system.
Mm-hmm.
Then you can get a domestic violence restraining order through the family code. So that would be in the family court department. And then there's a civil harassment, which pertains to workplace harassment, such as sexual abuse
Right.
most often.
Right.
And so that's based on the Code of Civil Procedure. So these options are available. I believe that the best option for victims is the domestic violence protection. And this is available not only in divorces, but it's available to any victim that is living with the abuser, or, for example, or shares a child is a co-parent with the abuser, or is in a dating or engagement relationship
Right.
with the abuser. So this is available. This option is available.
Yeah, and so I guess a question would be, can you think of a case or an example of where the woman was being abused or there was domestic violence and how the court protected her?
Yes, and
Without names, obviously, because legally we can't report any names.
Of course
but
not.
At least we can maybe talk about some examples of women that have had this kind of abuse and how you've helped protect them.
Okay, so I can think of a very good example where a lady was being abused at home. This was during a divorce proceeding, and she did not report. That's another thing I want to say. She did not report the abuse right away. So the time aspect is very important. So she did not report the abuse. The divorce went on, and the abuser decided that he did not want to pay alimony. So this would take me to the situation where the abuser would falsely accuse the victim, and falsely accuse the victim and
Go ahead and take a minute.
yeah, sorry, it's very emotional.
It's very emotional. I mean, you can tell that it's hard to talk about because this is real. So
Yeah,
take
so
your time.
the abuser would falsely accuse the victim of hitting this person, would get convicted, and then that conviction would be used against her for alimony. So
Right.
what I did, I was able. There's a law that says that you can rebut the presumption. There's a law that says if you are convicted of abuse, you can rebut. You are not entitled to alimony. And a lot of the times, abusers know this law if they're
Really?
sophisticated, and so they can go to court and request that the court deny alimony. But if you can expose the abuse and
Right.
rebut the abuse, you can get alimony in return.
Yeah, and so how can women protect themselves? I mean, one, we talked about this, is probably one of the biggest mistakes a lot of women make is when they're in that abusive situation is they don't report it the first time.
They don't, because they feel ashamed. For some reason, they feel sorry for the abuser, and they believe that it's not going to happen again. So what I would say as an attorney, I would say you have to report it. You have to go to the police department and report it. Even if you don't act on it any further, there has to be a record of it.
Right.
You have to tell people that you trust. You have to have witnesses, because the court will at some point ask you, did you tell anyone? And you have to be able to say that you did. Now, if you're afraid to say it, go to an agency that will keep this information confidential. However, report it. Also, there are photos, there are texts. If you are being abused through unwanted contacts, unwanted phone calls, save those. Save the phone calls, save the recordings. If there's a voicemail, a harassing voicemail, save the texts, save the photos, because this is all evidence. And what you can do then is you can go to court and request a restraining order. You can get an ex parte restraining order, which you can get on the same day. The judge will decide whether to grant the restraining order, and then the court usually sets a hearing within 21 days. It's an OSC hearing, order to show cause why there shouldn't be a permanent restraining order.
Okay. So you can get a temporary restraining order right away.
Right away within 24 hours.
Okay.
Yes.
So what are I think you might have covered this, but what are the first steps women should do?
I would say first, document the evidence. Then go to court. Contact an attorney if you can.
Right.
If you can't contact an attorney, go to court and go to the family department and tell them that you want to get a restraining order. You will request an ex parte, which is an emergency restraining order, and they will set a hearing for a permanent restraining order. And then the abuser has to be served. So you can make arrangements for the abuser to be served.
Yeah, yeah. And we were talking about, I mean, it's very interesting, and through my research for my book and the things that I'm doing and the presentations I do, is that Domestic violence against women is at an all-time high. Date rape is the #1 crime on most college campuses, and those are the cases of the young girls that are brave enough to report it. Because a lot of the girls don't report it because they're ashamed. They don't want to admit maybe they drank too much. Maybe they like the guy. So those are just the reported cases. And I was listening to Gloria Steinem, the early women's activist and founder of Cosmopolitan. She was saying that she's done this study through history, and they say that history repeats itself. So this is a very important message, and I want to talk with you a little bit about it, is that the domestic violence throughout history, as they've seen through the Roman Empire, the Greek Empire, all the way back through history, as the domestic violence against women goes up, the nation starts to go down. And so when you look at what's happening in the U.S. right now, it's really pretty incredible. So why is it, any idea of why it seems to be growing, or why is it we're just reporting it more, or it's in the news every day as some new allegation against somebody, or?
I believe that it's been there.
It's always been there.
Always been there, and it's always been happening. We are now just seeing the iceberg of it, the tip of it.
Right.
In terms of I think that women, for some psychological reason, accept this type of abuse, and they have not been reporting it. They have not voiced their concerns. So it's very important to report it, to go to court, and not be afraid to get that restraining order. And there are various restraining orders available.
Yeah.
For example, you can get a temporary custody order. You can get a child abduction order if you fear that your child is going to be abducted, because a lot of these abusers threaten.
Right.
The victim, usually the wife, of taking the children away. Or you can get an assaultive conduct and property destruction order, and that is very broad. It includes protection from molesting, attacking, striking, threatening, sexually assaulting, battery, harassing, and even annoying telephone calls, destroying personal property. All of that is included. There's a broad protection of abuse, which falls also under disturbance of peace. So if you are being somehow annoyed to the point that your peace is being disturbed, there is case law which protects that type of, which protects the victim from that type of abuse.
Right. So if you just don't feel safe where you are or in any situation, and a lot of times the abusers do threaten, or they're going to take away the children. You'll never see your kids again, or like you said, they control the money, so they take the money away.
Yeah, and I know I was going to add also another great method of protecting yourself is through recordings. Now, one has to be really careful because recordings are illegal. Recordings of a confidential communication between two people is illegal. However, a victim of domestic violence who surreptitiously records a conversation with an abuser can rely on the penal code to justify the recording when she reasonably believes recording is necessary to obtain evidence of any violent felony against her.
Okay.
And the history of abuse also supplies the reasonable belief. So that's why it's important to document the history of abuse.
Right.
Yeah.
I document all of it. So what are the evidence case? I guess what do you need to prove that there's abuse? Because he can deny it,
especially and they will.
Because in many cases it happens behind closed doors. And maybe the kids might see it or maybe not, but it's behind closed doors, so he's going to deny it.
More often than not, they do deny it. They always deny it. And more often than not, it's a he and she said situation.
Right.
That's why it is very important to document it. And I'm emphasizing this a lot. But
oh, yeah, absolutely.
The taking pictures. So when I take a client to court, I ask, do you have any evidence? Do you have any emails? Do you have any photos? Do you have pictures of the texts? Who was present, witnesses, who has seen the abuse? Unfortunately, most of them are, they're very private. The abuses happen behind closed doors, but all that plus the victim herself will have to speak up, and it's about speaking up at this point.
Yeah. I guess the question I would ask, and you've said that you were a victim of this kind of abuse.
Yes.
Why do women take it?
Yeah, that's a very good question.
Why do we? just like sexual harassment has been around in companies for a long time, and people who maybe have been victims of it or they've witnessed it or seen it, we've just sort of tolerated it. So why do women tolerate this?
You know, these abusers, they're very charming. They're very charming. They are usually the person that we love. They make you believe that you are loved. And somehow, as a victim of abuse, I can say that we believe that it will get better. He
won't do it again.
That's right.
He said he wouldn't do it again.
And we get threatened by the person. So it's very hard. I think there's a fear aspect to it, shame aspect, and then sometimes if a person drinks or whatnot, then they blame themselves. And accept it.
We're going to take a quick commercial break, and before we take commercial break, if you could spell your name and then how we would get in touch with you at your law firm in case there's women out there that want to reach out to you. So if you could spell your name, please, and then how we would find you.
Sure, it's Katerina, Katerina, last name Perreault, Perreault, and I'm located in Tarzana, and thank you for listening.
Okay, and we'll come back and we'll continue this important conversation. So thanks.
Imagine what it would feel like to lose everything. Your job, your home, your family, your dignity. This has happened to thousands of the men, women, veterans, and young adults we serve at Working Wardrobes. What do we do to help? We provide career development services, life skills workshops, job skills training. We provide the perfect interview outfit, and we get clients placed in jobs. Call Working Wardrobes, 714-210-2460. Donate, volunteer, invest, hire.
When it comes to pioneers in their respective industries, we all know the Apples, Starbucks, and Trader Joe's of the world. In the realm of recruiting, Decision Toolbox is the industry's best-kept secret, with 90% of their business from referrals and repeat customers. For over 20 years, Decision Toolbox's U.S.-based team of recruiters, sourcers, professional writers, quality personnel, and tech support has perfected a Six Sigma approach to talent management. No matter the size of the project, Decision Toolbox delivers incredible results. A cost per hire less than half of what contingency firms charge, with the winning candidate presented in an average of 14 days, all with a 12-month candidate warranty. With results like that, Decision Toolbox won't be a secret for long. Visit us at www.dtoolbox.com for more information.
All right. Wish we could tape the off-air conversations. I think there's sometimes some of the best stuff in here. But back to Patty here. Can I ask that question that I was just asking?
Yeah. Can you ask that question?
We had somebody from Laura's house in here. Laura's house is a home, a halfway house. I don't know what you call it, sort of a safe house for women who've suffered from abuse here in Orange County.
Right.
A place to go, because quite often they don't know where to go. And so it's a place, and they'll protect you, and nobody can get you, and you're safe, and you're anonymous, and you're protected, and you're comforted until you can transition out of this abusive relationship. It's an amazing organization. And they had somebody here, and they said, here's the statistic that stuck in my head, and I may have it off a little bit. But once somebody has been horribly abused, beaten up, put a gun in your mouth, I mean, whatever, picture the most horrible thing, told all these horrible, just beat to a pulp. And they finally make the decision to leave, because you talk about it takes a long time to make that decision. They go back. And they don't go back once or twice or 3 times. I think the minimum was 5 times before they finally say enough. Talk about that.
So why do they go back, and what can we do to help them?
Yeah, why do they, and why did I go back and stay in a relationship, abusive relationship for that long? Again, I can speak from my personal experience. I think there is a certain psychological control.
Yes.
And it doesn't matter where the woman is, how much money the household makes, how educated the lady is, or whether she's working or not, or whatnot, what kind of background she's from. The psychological control between the two people is so strong. it's very hard to break that psychological control, and I think that's why they go back.
Yeah.
They believe. I think hope is the thing that dies last, and they're so hopeful.
Yeah.
I was so hopeful that the abuse will stop.
Yeah. And I want you to say that again, that hope. Say that again, because that was really insightful.
Hope dies last.
Hope dies last. So you
Yeah.
go back hoping he's better,
Yes.
hoping he stopped drinking, or hoping something happened.
And almost hoping that somehow you can help the situation, that you will improve.
I can make it better.
Yeah, that maybe there's something that you need to change about yourself. So it is a driving force. I think hope definitely
Yeah,
is the
yeah,
last
yeah.
thing.
And I think a lot of people, know about or talk about sort of the hardcore, physical abuse, but they don't sometimes think about the mental abuse that goes with it. And they don't have to be connected. The person can simply just be mentally abusing the individual and never touching them physically.
Exactly, and sometimes the mental abuse is worse than the physical. But I find that these two are very intertwined. But what's more dangerous, and here I think what we are not seeing, and this is connected also to the sexual abuse that we have now heard about in terms of the Weinstein effect. The psychological and mental abuse you don't see, and the victim is not sure if it's even happening.
Oh, wow.
Because when you're being abused like that and you're in that relationship, you may think that it's okay, that this is not abuse. So again, I would like to emphasize that name calling is abuse, intimidation is abuse, threatening is abuse, moving around money without your consent is abusive. All of that should be
Right.
Noted.
Yeah. Yeah. So what evidence is admissible and legal in court? So you talked about, and I really want to emphasize this, so we're probably going to say it a couple of times. If you've ever experienced this, the physical, the mental abuse, or the financial control abuse, report it. Report it to someone. Make sure it's documented as best you can. Seek friends, your church, somebody seek help, because if you don't have the evidence, you may not have a case. And I had a woman on my show, Dr. Carol Soloway, who wrote a book called Sex Happened, which is it's a fictitious book, but it is a little bit of her story when she really talks about it, where her husband had an affair, or in the story, the husband had an affair and took away the children because he accused her that she was abusive, and she never was, and she lost her kids for years because she didn't have any evidence or facts that he was the abuser, he was the one that was doing this stuff. So it's very important to do that. But what kind of things what kind of evidence should people collect or have for court?
So as a lawyer, I will say that reporting is the number one issue. If you stay quiet for too long, you lose credibility. For example, if I had a case where the abuse happened in 2010, it wasn't reported until 2014. The judge questioned why the abuser did not report it, and if it was so serious, then why didn't she come forward? So the victim, and the victim lost credibility. So what we need is the reporting, then we need the photos.
Right.
If there are any, we need
Right.
the recordings if it can be done legally, and text, emails, all of that. Witnesses are important as well.
Yeah, and I guess how does violence maybe is happening to a woman affect the family and the home?
Well, again, it all happens behind closed doors. I think the entire family, when abuse happens between two people, the entire family is the victim.
Or victims, yeah.
And somehow the family, if it happens for a long time, it becomes their norm.
Yeah.
And they once they enter that home, it's happening, and they don't report it. It becomes part of them.
Yeah.
And then the children suffer, the victim suffers, and the abuser just gets more empowered. And that's not what we want to do. We want to empower the victims.
Yeah, that's very important. We want to empower the victims, not the people that are doing the abuse. And then, is there a risk that if you're a woman who's been abused, and maybe your children maybe have heard it or seen it, like you said, it becomes the norm? Are the children at higher risk to become either abusers or victims because they think it's the norm?
I believe it has a profound effect on the child or the children.
Right.
When a child grows up in an abusive household, that child will be used to, as an adult, that child will be used to the abuse. So they may actually look for familiar people that express that type of behavior. So
Right.
they may be prone to being in a relationship with which is abusive. So it's very important to eliminate the abuse from the household as soon as possible. Because, for example, if a son sees his mother being abused, he may adopt that type of behavior, or even worse, he may find a woman who allows him to be the abuser or be abused. So it is definitely something that can have a profound effect on a child when the child is growing up.
So for all the women out there that are mothers, I want you to really think about the fact that it's not just impacting you, it's impacting your children. So if you've got a son and a daughter who've witnessed this kind of yelling, even without physical abuse, it's the mental abuse of the yelling, screaming, shouting, calling people names. And that's how your children grow up.
And they grow up insecure.
They grow up insecure, but they grow up in that environment where they're waiting for the next, thing to happen. They almost have like this response, like, don't let that happen to me.
Yeah.
There's a good chance that they're going to then find relationships of their own that mirror that. So the son might find a relationship where he can dominate the woman that he's now going to be attached to. And the young girl, may look for a strong, controlling, dominating spouse. And so you're just continuing that cycle.
It's the comfort zone. Yeah. And sometimes the abuser and the abusive situation creates a comfort zone for the victim, and the victim doesn't know anything else, so she cannot break through.
Yeah.
So that's why it's important to break it as soon as possible, because the longer it lasts, the harder it is to break.
Yeah. I did a Sue Talk this last week, which is like a TED Talk for women, and one of the other Sue Talkers, they call us, she was on stage, and the stage was dark. And she said, and the lights went out. So her talk was the lights went out. And so as a 3-year-old little girl, she was locked in a closet by a mother who was abusive. Not always men.
Sure.
The mother was abusive of the children and would lock her in a closet for 20 minutes to an hour at a time when she thought she acted up. And because that was the way she was raised, and the whole story went on, that then she married an extremely violent man. And again, the lights went out. When he beat her, that she was unconscious. And so it was a very compelling, touching story, but she just found a person who perpetuated what she had in her childhood, because like you said, it was her comfort zone.
Yeah. And it's very, very important to try something new.
Yeah.
Try a life of dignity
Right.
and without abuse. Yeah.
Are there times when it's one of the questions on here, I want to make sure I read it right. Are there instances where the alleged abuser is in fact the abused?
Well, very much so. And that especially plays a role in divorces where a lot of money is concerned. When one party is, like I said, in terms of the alimony, when one party is to receive the alimony and the other party doesn't want to pay, well, they can just falsely accuse that party of the abuse and then use that against them. And the code says that if you are convicted of abuse, of domestic violence, you are not to get the alimony. In my case, I was able to rebut that presumption, and I was able to get the alimony. But I did have to go through that process where I was accused and convicted, and I was able to rebut it.
Yeah.
By showing that that I was actually the victim.
So how do people protect themselves so that what happened to you doesn't happen to them?
Well, you need to, like I said, first you need to get an attorney as soon as possible. Also, perhaps go see a psychologist, get some help. Talk to someone who loves you, who can see it from the outside. Because when you're in the abusive relationship and you're inside, you don't see it. You lose all objectivity. You lose all, almost I would say, common sense.
That's a really good word. You lose your objectivity, but you lose your common sense. Would you tolerate this behavior if it was being done to your sister?
Absolutely not. And actually, a lot of the times, the victims are able to recognize abuse in other people, in other relationships, but they're not able to recognize it in their own. There's some sort of like defense mechanism that kicks in and prevents the victim from being able to see their own situation.
Yeah.
So talk to someone, get someone to recognize it for you, because you're probably not recognizing it, but you know deep inside that it's happening.
And I guess a lot of times I think women get in these situations and they try and forgive the abuser. He'll stop drinking, he won't do this again.
Right.
But a lot of times we blame ourselves.
We do.
I must have said something that made him angry, or in the sexual harassment in the workplace, I must have worn something that was too subjective. Women, we blame ourselves first.
We do. We say, well, we have that little voice in us that says, well, we're not good enough. We're
Yep.
not pretty enough. We are not good enough of a mother. We're not good enough of a wife. And the abuser, usually very charming in the beginning, has the ability to convince us that we are less than what we are, and we're not less. We are good enough as we are, and no matter what,
Yeah.
it's not acceptable.
It's almost like the abuser, and I'm going to use this example, it might be a little graphic. It's like you've got a wound, like an open wound, and they'll pick at that, or they'll expose it, and they'll just continue. They'll figure out where you think you're vulnerable, like maybe you're not tall enough, or you're not thin enough, or your hair's not curly enough, or you're not this, and it's that I'm not good enough syndrome many women suffer from. And the abuser will find a way to just find that little wound.
Oh, they know where it is.
And they just explode it.
For one, they know where it is. They sometimes create it, and then they just keep at it.
Keep adding on and adding on.
Yeah, and the thing is, you don't want to show it to the world, but it is there, and only the abuser and you know it. And if you don't speak up, that's how it's going to stay.
Yep.
So you got to reveal your wounds.
And sometimes I think maybe they're ashamed.
Very, very ashamed. Again, I don't know. There's
Or
some
embarrassed and shamed. I mean, there have been so many cases I've seen where even like women police officers were being abused by their spouse and didn't report it. Or women, high-level executive women.
See, that's the thing. It's very interesting where women can be very strong on the outside. And like you said, they can have a very important profession, being a lawyer, being a police officer, being a doctor. But once they get inside that home and inside that personal space where there's that relationship with the abuser, they become a different person.
Yeah.
They fall under the spell of the abuser, as I see it.
Yeah.
And they just have to break that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, you just think about it. It's just they take off their nice they're a lawyer like
Right.
you were.
Right.
They're in court. They're a strong person. They take off their suit. They go home and they become this little girl.
Yeah.
This little girl that was in this situation and not knowing how to deal with it, and then embarrassed to say anything.
Especially if they're in a strong position, because how can they reconcile being in an abusive relationship and then being outside in the world fighting for people? It's very hard to reconcile that.
Yeah.
So that shame and just misunderstanding is part of that. Yeah.
So what do you do? This is we talked about this before the show, but it's not quite on here. But what do you do if you're a friend and you've got a girlfriend that you think is being abused? I mean, it may be physical abuse, or it could just be the mental abuse, and maybe they're at a party or a function, and the friend is noticing the person who might be being abused, or the victim. Maybe the husband's being a little rude and putting her down in front of everybody. If you're that friend that sees this happening, what can you do?
First thing,
Or what did you want people to help you do?
I would say to this friend, don't accept it. What's happening is not the norm. Don't accept it. Talk to someone. Tell the person what's going on. If you feel in pain, if you feel hurt, and you know that this is happening, you have to report it. I would say it's going to happen. It's not going to stop. It's going to happen over and over and over again. Like we said, they usually go back 5 times at least. Well, and it always happens again. Don't believe the promises. Don't be ashamed, and don't feel sorry for the abuser, because more often than not, the abuser has a very strong ability to make you feel that you somehow deserve it and they were the victim.
Yeah, they make you feel guilty.
Yes, they do.
You made me do this, right? You made me angry. You made me drink, whatever it happens to be.
Yes, unfortunately, that's how it goes.
So how can the potential person that is concerned they might be accused of abuse, how can they protect themselves?
Contact a lawyer. Contact the police department. Make a report. It doesn't mean that it will go anywhere, but at least you have it documented. So in the event that later down the road you need further protection, because usually the abuse escalates.
Yeah.
And you finally realize that you need to get out of the relationship. You want to have that history of documentation of
Right.
the previous abuse. Go to court, go to the family law section, tell the
Okay.
clerk that you want to get a restraining order. There are forms, judicial council forms
Right.
that you can fill out, and you can just start with that.
Yeah. And so if I'm a woman who has been abused and I've sort of been forgiving him and it continues to happen, is there a certain, do I go into yellow pages? Do I go on the internet and just search for a family law attorney? Do I look for an attorney specializing in domestic violence?
Yeah, you can just go into Google and you can try to put in the domestic violence protection restraining orders family law litigation attorney,
Okay.
and usually some of that comes up. So you can get the help. And I was just going to say, add a very important aspect to this: you need to leave the house. You cannot fight abuse as long as you stay in the same household with the abuser. It's impossible.
Okay, so that's really important. You have to leave the house, and that's why Paul, my studio manager, mentioned Laura's house, and there are the similar homes all around the state, all around the country, where you can go to get some help, and they will help you get the legal help you need. They will help protect you, give you a place to sleep and comfort, and
Absolutely.
don't go back.
No.
Don't go
No,
back.
because it will happen again, unfortunately. Yes.
And unfortunately, I think there's a lot of women that think, maybe they've been dating this guy for a while and he's puts her down a lot in front of friends, and eventually maybe it becomes violent. But then they marry this guy, and I think there's a lot of women that think, well, I'll change him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We are not that powerful.
No,
We don't make miracles.
yeah, I would say we may be strong women, but honey, it ain't gonna happen.
And I would say for the ladies, don't get into a relationship where you feel the need to change someone. Get into that's a no-go from the start.
Yep.
Get into a relationship where the person is worthy and a good person to begin with, because you're not going to be able to change an abusive person. It
No.
will not happen.
Or somebody who is I think people just so much when they think of abuse, they think of the physical abuse, but it's the mental abuse that I think sometimes is even more damaging.
Absolutely, especially when this Weinstein era, we can see that even the psychological abuse is involved in the sexual abuse.
Yeah.
It's the control over the victim.
It's controlled power.
Power, control. So in a marriage where you have unequal parties, where one has more control over finances or the family, that plays a role in that.
Yeah.
So the victim has to get control back, and the only way to get it back is to move out, to move away from the abuser,
Yep.
and seek help.
Yeah, and I think other advice for women is pick your partner carefully,
Absolutely.
because like you said, you cannot change anybody.
No.
They have to be willing to change themselves. And so if they're already, when you're dating this individual and you're at social functions and they're telling you, they're saying, well, that doesn't look good on you. And there's ways to give compliments and put people down, but if they're constantly putting you down, that's not going to change when you marry them.
And you don't deserve that, ladies.
You don't.
Don't settle for less.
Don't
ever.
settle.
Your instinct tells you, there may be something wrong. Listen to that little voice in you that says it's not good enough.
Yeah. You deserve. The clear message is, don't tolerate it. You're better than that,
That's right.
and you shouldn't be in this kind of a relationship. So pick your partners carefully and make sure that you understand that you're not going to change him. If he's anything, they have to do it themselves.
They say that rather than being in an abusive relationship, and I'm talking about psychological abuse
Right.
as well, it's better to be alone
Yeah.
until you find the right one. And especially if you have children, you do not want to expose the children
Yeah.
to the abuse, which then can lead to other future problems.
Right, definitely. So very strongly out there for women. So I really want to really talk about what can women do to empower themselves. They may not even be in an abusive relationship; they're just in a relationship. So what are the maybe the three most important things women can do to empower themselves?
I would say, first, just because you're in a relationship, that doesn't mean that you lost your own self. So proceed with your dreams. Do not put your dreams on the back burner for him. Never do that. You will regret it, I can guarantee.
Yep. Been there, done that, as you could say.
Think of yourself first.
Yep.
And if you see that something is wrong, don't be quiet about it. Talk about it. Talk about it, because other ladies need to hear it as well. It's happening. Don't be ashamed of it. And like I said, listen to your inner voice.
Yeah. Yeah.
And let your inner voice be heard.
Yeah. If something doesn't feel right, women have that women's instinct. If something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't right.
Exactly. Don't settle for that.
Yeah. And
yeah.
I love those three things. So don't give up your dreams for someone else. You know,
No.
Walt Disney said, cherish your dreams. They're the visions of your childhood. And so think about that childhood little girl you wanted to be. And don't give up that dream. If you wanted to be a doctor, a lawyer, an actress, a radio show host, whatever it happens to be, don't give up that dream for anybody because you're worth it. And putting yourself first. Because women tend to do everything for everybody else, and we don't tend to put ourselves first.
Yeah, we're taught to be the providers, the nurturers, but we have to nurture ourselves first.
Yeah.
In order to do a good job for the rest of the family or for the world.
Yeah, yeah. And just like they say on the airline, when you're on the airline, when you're listening to that safety thing on the airline, which says to put your mask on first.
Yes.
So as a woman, you have to put your mask on first because you can't take care of your child if you can't breathe.
Exactly. And that would apply to relationships as well.
Yeah.
You have to be the independent person. You have to know what your financial informations are, because a lot of women don't even know anything.
You have a right to know where your checking account is, where your savings account is, how much money you have, how it's being spent.
That's right.
What
and
he makes and what you make.
And when your husband tells you, well, don't worry, honey, I have it covered.
I'll take care of it.
No, you have to figure it out.
Yeah.
Because especially if you are in a controlling relationship where the husband is controlling you, you have to know what's going on in order to be able to be the best person you can be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so one last thing, and then I want to make sure we know how to get a hold of you again. So the one last question I want to ask you in particular, if you were looking at yourself, if you were looking back at yourself when you were a little girl, what advice would you give her today, knowing what you know today? So if you were looking at yourself when you were 5 or 6 years old, what advice would you give yourself today?
Wow. I would. That's a great question, Patty. Almost bringing tears to my eyes. I would say again, don't settle for less. If you are being abused, don't accept it. Follow your dreams.
Yep.
Ladies, you have to follow your dreams. You can do it.
Yep.
And you will do it, and you are good enough.
And you are I think that's you are good enough. You deserve it. You deserve everything you have in your life, and you do. Katerina, you do. So last thought or last thing is how can we get in touch with you? And please spell your name again because it's a beautiful name.
Thank you, Patty.
A beautiful Czech name.
So you can contact me at Katerina Perreault Law, and I'll spell it. It's Katerina. And last name is Perreault, Perreault. I practice from Tarzana, but I provide services to LA County, Orange County, and I do probate and family law litigation, including domestic violence.
Yeah.
So ladies, if you need help, just contact me. My phone number is on my Estate Bar website.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess the thing I'd like to say to women out there, this has been an incredible show, and I really appreciate you being here and being honest and open. And it's okay because when the emotions come out, it's really meaningful. This is a really important topic. So if you're listening to this, if you're watching this, please share it. Please share this out to every woman that you know, because this message is important. If they're not experiencing the physical or mental or abuse or the sexual harassment, I'm guarantee you they know somebody that is.
Patty, thank you so much for giving me this platform and be able to share my story and my services.
That's awesome. It's
Thank
awesome.
you.
Well, thanks to everybody out there, and let's all make sure we live our dreams. We put ourselves number one on our list, and we say to ourselves every day, I deserve it.
We're good enough.
We're good enough. Thank you, Katerina.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to Women Kicking Glass, the only radio show on OC Talk Radio dedicated to empowering women to be the best they can be. Listen each week or download the podcast at patty.grimm.podbean.com. To reach out to Patty to schedule a speech webinar or to learn more about her leadership and team training, contact Patty at pattygrimm@live.com for more information about her company and her books. Have a kicking day!